Welcome to this reader feedback edition of Forthright. It started out to be a column on how the State Building Code Council has been politicized, and it turned into a critique of Governor Inslee's climate policies and their impact on affordable housing. As published February 17 in the Spokesman Review, with preemptive apologies for mispronouncing anyone's name. Titled, Inslee Puts Affordable Housing in Peril with Focus on Climate. Building codes are intended to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. In Washington, the State Building Code Council has become a policy arm of the governor's office, attempting to accomplish through the code what climate change alarmists cannot accomplish directly through the legislature. The council is made up of 15 appointed members. 2 recent appointments for slots representing residential and commercial construction were made outside of the process spelled out in RCW 19-27070. The recognized trade associations, whose nominees were ignored, have sued. 5 members of the council are currently serving as lame ducks, with terms which expired in January of 2022. A 6th position representing the interests of individuals with a physical disability has been left unfilled for at least 3 years, according to Spokane County Commissioner Al French. His term on the State Building Code Council, representing Eastern Washington counties, expires in January of 2023. Quote, Diane Glenn, former SBCC chair, really understood how these rules are going to impact entry-level and low-income housing, French said. This SBCC is working aggressively to eliminate natural gas as a fuel source, end quote. Glenn, a former residential builder who now provides special inspection and energy code compliance services, was renominated by the Building Industry Association of Washington to represent residential construction. Governor Jay Inslee replaced her with Anthony Mashmet, owner of Dwell Development Plus Design Build in Seattle. Dwell is described on its website as, quote, ultra green and specializing in, quote, super cool homes that lead the home energy efficient market, end quote. If the SBCC was still serving its original role as a technical advisory council focused on public health and safety, the upcoming gubernatorial appointment opportunities would list the applications under the Government Operations and Public Safety tab. They are instead listed under Climate and Energy. Quote, it's not about building safety anymore, it's about climate change and energy efficiency, said French, an architect and developer. He sees problems when the cost-benefit analysis shows, quote, spending more dollars to achieve a smaller return. That's where we're at now. We have priced a significant part of our population out of home ownership, end quote. SBCC decisions impose a regressive tax on housing. 2 of Dwell's newest net zero ready super cool homes recently sold for $1.35 million each. Building a more than $1 million home to be net zero ready adds relatively little to the cost, but quote, the last energy code update added $20,000 to an average starter home, said Joel White, executive director of the Spokane Home Builders Association. It's a much higher percentage of the total construction, end quote. He believes the next update will continue the pattern if unchecked by the legislature. Democrats in the legislature aren't checking, they're doubling down. Under engrossed substitute House Bill 1770, quote, quoting from the code, the State Building Code Council shall further define and include net zero ready measures in the code adoption process, end of quote from the bill, beyond the current energy code. It's a backdoor effort to accomplish through the SBCC what Representative Alex Rammel, a Democrat of Bellingham, has been unable to accomplish through the legislature or his local city council, banning natural gas for heating. The House floor debate in the wee hours of Super Bowl Sunday morning highlighted 2 visions. Republicans pointed out disproportionate impact on middle-class Washingtonians caught in the affordable housing crisis. We're short 250,000 homes in the state, and adding thousands of dollars to the cost of a home and to public housing isn't a solution, according to Representative J.T. Wilcox, Republican of Yelm. Quote, whose family will not have a home as a result of this bill, end quote. Rammel insisted we can confront the climate crisis and, quote, building right the first time is an obvious solution, end quote. Faced with 2 perceived crises, we need to listen to Thomas Sowell's advice from his classic 1986 book, A Conflict of Visions, Ideological Origins of Political Struggles, in which he writes, quote, There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, end quote. It is appropriate for these trade-offs to be debated in legislative bodies, county commissions, and city councils. Passing the buck to the SBCC to disappear into the relatively obscure rulemaking process disenfranchises voters. We do have a climate challenge, although models disagree on timelines and scientists continue to debate the magnitude, causation, and correlation among the many variables. But we absolutely positively have an affordable housing crisis. We don't need complex modeling to see it coming, just math. We have more households than we have houses and apartments to hold them. Theoretically, the governor's appointments representing 15 categories of stakeholders defined by the legislature are sufficient to protect the interests of a diverse public. But when a council organized for public safety is converted to a climate policy committee and appointments are made on political allegiance, it doesn't work. Quote, "This is a political goal. When the economics outpace the goal, then you have to ask yourself if you should adjust the goal. This governor and this council have not asked that question," said French. "You'd think a Democratic governor would be concerned about how his policies are impacting low-income people and communities of color, but he's not," end quote. English can be an imprecise language with many layers of meaning on a single word. One email came from a fan who read the column with a little literal mindset and said, "A quick question, what does Mr. Dwell use to cool his super cool homes? I know nothing about this kind of science, so I'm curious." And ma'am, I'm pretty sure Mr. Dwell was referring to how marvelous they are, not their temperature. But you're right, it could be read that way, and thank you for taking the time to write. The problem here is the Building Code Council really stepping into making policy decisions about which type of fuel should be used, what are appropriate goals to meet this other policy goal of climate change, but not really about sticking to basic building and safety. And that's one of the things that's really driving up the cost of housing, is that we have added more and more requirements, all of them just a little bit here and just a little bit there, until we really have started pricing people out of the market. A question from the Bailey family came, "Today's article was bang on target. The Greens are making the housing renting market worse, not better, all while screaming that we have to do more for the homeless. You were on target. Expect flack, but ignore it. You're doing well." And from the Peterson family, "Nice job in today's SR. Does anyone in the Ivory Tower in Spokane get it?" Well, I appreciated the encouragement from those two emails, but amazingly, there was no flack arrived via email as yet, although who knows what upcoming letters to the editor might bring. I would hope that perhaps I made the point that the Building Code Council needs to focus on basic health and safety, and that the more that we increase these regulations, the more costs that we add to the cost of building housing, the more people simply are priced out of the market. There was a longer response that started with saying, "I read your article on shortage of homes. All this talk about building new and changing zoning is a smokescreen. It's simple math and logic. We have about 1 million homeless. We have over 12 million people in this country illegally, 2 million last year alone." Well, he's right. We are driving up the demand, and that certainly is impacted by the lower supply. But the first thing we need to work on, and again, this is the Building Code Council, we need to focus on the Building Code Council, is what impact do the decisions that they make have on the cost of housing. So these readers who did reply all focused on the affordable housing angle, and so have many of those who testified on HB 1770. They made the case for eliminating the net zero ready requirement. And net zero ready just means putting in some wiring and some other pieces of equipment and systems in place so that you could later spend more money to add solar panels and add other kinds of improvements to the house. While the governor's staff alleged the additional cost for net zero ready was in the $3,000 range, public testimony made the case for a figure closer to $20,000, in part based on the experience of people in Boulder County, Colorado, who were faced with rebuilding the houses that they lost in that massive wildfire. But they would have to rebuild under net zero ready codes that had been adopted by Colorado. And that's what it was going to cost them, above and beyond just replacing what they had already had. And the most specious argument from supporters of Net Zero Ready is the idea that a potentially lower energy bill, I mean, if you actually do the whole net zero installation, it's that a potentially lower energy bill bears any relationship to qualifying for a home loan. If the house costs $20,000 more, then a 10% down payment is $2,000 higher. And the debt to income ratio for the household still has to meet minimum requirements. There's no place on a home mortgage application to claim potential lower energy costs will qualify you for a larger mortgage payment. People who would like to build wealth through home ownership are priced out of the entry-level housing market, and ironically often paying more in rent than if they were able to get into an entry-level house. So this kind of policy is not what building code councils were meant to be deciding. This is a political trade-off question, not a technical building question. And this is another sign of an increasing politicization of these appointed councils, with the legislature passing authority to the councils when it really should belong to the legislature, where it's debated by the people's representatives. Thank you for joining me on this issue of Forthright. Hope that you will follow my page at Substack, Sulani Madison, substack.com, for updates on any new information, new posts.